Hello, everybody. We're just going to get started in a couple of minutes, just as people start dialing in. Well, good afternoon, good morning if you're joining us from the US. I'm delighted to have our next session of the Leadership and Innovator series with someone that I'm getting to know, and we've done a lot more work over the last 12 months for various different reasons. Catherine Lewis La Torre, Chief Executive of British Business Bank. Catherine, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So this is our, the Innovate Finance Power Hour is back. So this is our digital format where we learn from the brightest and the best from across the financial services ecosystem. And we find out a bit more about their journeys, their challenges, and their outlook on the future. So no set format today. There is a Q&A session panel on the top or the bottom of your screen, depending which device you're tuning in from. Please do put questions through it, and we'd be delighted to pass those on to Catherine. So I'm sure most people know Catherine is CEO of the government-owned British Business Bank. She took up the role on the 1st of September last year, and what an incredible time to take up that role. Previously having the position of CEO of the bank's two commercial subsidiaries, British Patient Capital and British Business Investment. So at least she knows what she was getting herself into. Coming from a career of venture capital and private equity fund management, joining from Cardano Risk Management, where you're head of private equity. I'm responsible for managing a global portfolio of private capital fund investments with over £1 billion of commitments. So you've been in this for a while, Catherine. Prior to that, Catherine was a partner with secondary specialist Fondinvest Capital in Paris, having previously been one of the founding partners of the fund of funds manager Proventure, which focused on venture and growth capital investing in Europe. And I'm sure there's so much more of your career. So I think even just in the brief intro of your bio, Catherine, it just shows you what an amazing career you've had. So today I think you're going to share some of your insights into your career journey, your professional and your personal experience, obviously, but also just to learn about some of the challenges and barriers, and perhaps some of those challenges have doubled in the last 12 months. It feels like we've all doubled our experience of dealing with the crisis. But just delighted to have you there. So I'd love to start about just how it all began, because I think you started your career as a private equity analyst, but you were initially advised to consider journalism. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about where the journalist comes from. Does that help you now? And how did you end up starting as a private equity analyst?
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. It's a great question. So I graduated in the late 80s, which was not a brilliant time actually to be looking for your first position in the productive workspace. But nevertheless, I thought I'm going to be able to crack on and do this. I was fortunate because I had a good degree from a good university. I had a first-class degree in economics from the London School of Economics, and that opens a few doors, of course. But the big problem I had was that I had no idea really what I wanted to do, and was casting around wildly for what I should be doing. And a tutor at the LSE at the time suggested journalism. He said, you love current affairs, you write beautifully, why don't you go off and work for The Economist, or something like that. So that was my starting idea. And I was applying for positions on that basis, and I saw an advertisement for the UK Venture Capital Journal. And that was in the careers office at the LSE. I had no idea what venture capital was at the time, but I saw journals. I thought journalism, I'll apply for that. Well, apparently there were over 700 applications for that job because it'd been posted in career offices in many different universities across the country, but I managed to secure it. And that was my entry in what became the private equity industry. So I spent about a year and a half as an analyst with venture economics, which was then later bought by Thomson Financial. And I also had to do an awful lot of number crunching, running analyses through very old-fashioned databases now. They used to take all night to run their programs. So lots of very late nights and early mornings doing that. And having written about private equity and venture capital for about a year and a half, I decided, actually, I quite like this venture capital stuff. I think I should go off and do it, without any idea at all of just how difficult it might be to get into that industry. So I was, whatever I was, 22 years old at the time, with very little experience behind me, but decided that I would go off and be a private equity investment manager. Sounded cool. And I was given a position with Cinven, which was at that point the in-house investment arm of British Coal Pension Plan. So that's where I really started on my investment journey, which was fabulous. I learned a tremendous amount, and that's where I got the whole investing bug, actually, and the interest of investing in businesses and growing businesses.
Wow, it's so you're one of the few people that's probably had roughly the same career path, all in different guises around for you. I think I wish I'd known. I was so clear on my goal path when I was that age. I think I've changed a few times since then. So you make it sound very easy, and obviously it's not so easy for people to come into into jobs nowadays, perhaps. And you talked about sort of posting in careers officers. Who was there to support you in those early years of your career, and also did you have any mentors, and do you still use mentors today, officially or unofficially?
Yes, I think I did have mentors very early on in my career. I just didn't recognize that that's what they were. But these were people who were ready to, be very generous with their time and give me some advice. And somebody who was very important in the early part of my career was a guy called Richard Lyons, who worked for the venture capital arm of Hambrecht and Quist at the time. And I'd joined Cinven as an investment manager. There was one investment manager and 12 investment directors. And there was a huge gap between, my level and being on my own of one, and then the 12 investment directors. And I remember asking Richard, what do I need to do actually to demonstrate that I can be an investment director rather than carrying on reading business plans and crunching through Excel files all day? And what he said to me was, look, it'd be really helpful if you had some experience of running a real business, rather than just reading about them in business plans and crunching, P&L accounts and so on. And he said, you should go and take an operational role somewhere. And of course I said, what's an operational role? That sounded like something in the medical space to me at the time. And then, of course, it became en vogue to really have operational experience in the industry. But this is, again, going back early 90s, it wasn't really in vogue. So he said, no, go and run a company, a small business, or a division of a bigger business. And then you'll be able to understand what it's like for an entrepreneur or a management team every day trying to run a business, how you get funding together, how you grow a business, how you hire people, how you build your plans and so on. So I thought, what sort of business can I run with my experience? And I reached out to somebody else that I knew through the BVCA and said, look, I need some operational experience. And at that point, being very confident about it, I need some operational experience. And do you have any suggestions? And this was somebody called Michael Geary, who worked for Prudential at the time. And he said, oh, the European Venture Capital Association could really do with you because it's in a bit of a mess. And I said, oh, where are they? In the city? And he said, no, Catherine, it's the European Venture Capital Association. They're in Brussels. And so to cut a very long story short, I went to meet some people in Brussels and was offered the job there to head up marketing for the EVCA. And my brief was really to take this small association, to grow the membership base, and to turn what was of course, a non-for-profit organization, which was losing a lot of money, a remarkable amount of money it was losing, into a profitable entity over a period of time. So I went off to Brussels and did that. My plan at the time was that I would go there, do that for a couple of years, learn French along the way, and then go back and then sit down with my former boss in Cinven and say, I've got operational experience now, can I be an investment director, please? So it was very naive, but that was the sort of plan. And what actually happened was while I was in Brussels, I met a very nice man who I ended up marrying. And that man worked at NATO. He was a military policeman with the Italian police. And we decided sort of 2 years into the relationship that we would get married. Actually, he decided we would get married. I wasn't totally convinced at the time. But that did entail following him to Rome, because he was in NATO for 4 years for a stage, and then he needed to go back into head office in Rome. So I thought, head office in Rome, how bad could this be? I'll just carry on sort of what I'm doing in Rome. And that's when I decided to, not go back to the UK as per my previous plan, but to go and embark on a new adventure in Italy. And that was probably one of the hardest things I've done, not because living in Rome isn't a fantastic experience, but I had no idea just how difficult it would be to get a high quality job, if you like, something that I really wanted to do in an environment where I was a foreigner, a woman, and with some experience, but not huge amounts of experience. And how that sort of worked its way through, I think I wrote something like 30 letters at the time, so old days, wrote 30 letters, put them actually in an envelope and posted them off to various agencies across Rome, and heard nothing back. Zero response from anywhere, probably because I was writing in English, which probably wasn't a great idea. But nevertheless, I was writing to sort of organizations that had an international angle, but I had no response. And again, just fortuitously, sometimes you just have to be in the right place at the right time. Somebody that I knew through the EVCA was wanting to set up within his business a more international angle. And through a very convoluted route, he got in touch with me and said, oh, I understand you're in Rome. I know from so-and-so and so-and-so that you're in Rome. I'm looking to do this. Are you interested? And I had, multiple not options, and I decided to do it. And that turned out to be a fantastic experience, working with a group called Sofipa, which was the private equity division of Medio Credito Centrale, which was the state-owned bank lending to SMEs. So that was the first experience I had of being with a lender, actually, but within the private equity division. So yes, all of these people effectively along the way were sort of mentors, because they were pointing me in the right direction. I just didn't recognize that that's what they were. And my career has continued like that, I think, with me reaching out to people that I know and asking for advice, and actually being quite ready to follow advice as well. And sometimes that advice has been better than others, but it's always been given from, a good direction, from a good place. So it is worthwhile. And that's something I'd say to anyone on their career journey. Do reach out to people in your network and beyond to try and get that sort of insight and advice. It can be very powerful.
Wow, I mean, that's quite the whistle-stop tour, literally, I suppose, around Europe. So are you fluent in French and Italian, or?
My Italian is fluent, and also because, of course, being married to an Italian, I have more opportunities to speak Italian as well. And we have our summer place there, so I have the opportunity to spend 2 or 3 weeks a year, typically in non-lockdown environments, of course, in Italy. I also speak French because I worked there for a period of time, but my French isn't fluent by any stretch of the imagination. And we worked in English in the office, but my passive French is pretty good. And I love German. I lived in Switzerland for 10 years and learned Hochdeutsch, and really enjoy speaking German when I have the opportunity.
Yeah. That's quite the impressive journey. So you've done this whistle-stop tour around Europe with some incredible roles by the sounds of it. How do you think that experience, the broad experience you've had, has helped you to get where you are today?
So, I think one of the pivotal experiences for me was when I started my own business, which I did following on from Sofipa, I worked there for nearly 4 years, and then decided I wanted to do something else. Again, not really knowing what that something else was. And again, through somebody that I knew through the EVCA network, actually, which turned out to be a really incredible network for me. There was a group in Scandinavia wanting to set up a fund of funds, which was like a new concept in Scandinavia at the time. And this was in 1998. And they'd put together a core team of sort of investment professionals and fundraising professionals that would form the nucleus of the team. But they wanted somebody with European exposure and a European contact base, a network base with private equity managers across Europe. And that's what I could take into that sort of partnership. So we started with 4 of us, 2 Finns, a Swede and myself. Everybody thought I was Danish, actually, because I looked sort of Nordic, and because everybody else was Nordic, they assumed I was too. And we started a business from absolute scratch and raised ultimately three funds and took on 3 separate accounts. And then 10 years later, actually, the business was acquired by one of our competitors. But that whole experience of building a business from nothing and going through some really hairy moments, because shortly after we launched our fund, our first fund, which had a strategy to invest in VC and growth capital, we went straight into the dot-com, max boom and then max bust. And we'd raised a fund to invest in that area. So discussing with our investors how we were going to manage that and what we would do to our investment strategy to sort of face into the environment that we had ahead of us was, they were really hairy days, but we got through it. We also had the Asian crisis, of course, and all sorts of things were unfolding along the way, but we always managed to be very nimble and find ways to address the issues that we had. But that, I think, is the common experience for every entrepreneur. There's never plain sailing. And just when you think you've got it all worked out, something else comes down the track, to throw you off course. And COVID, of course, has had that impact for hundreds and thousands of businesses across the country, across the world. And I really feel for these entrepreneurs that you spend time and effort to build a business and get it to a certain stage, and then something comes left field to really undermine and challenge everything that you've been building, sometimes for years.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. Just an incredible challenge for everyone involved. It doesn't matter, even if your business is exploding on the back of, in a positive way, on the back of demand. Just nobody could have been prepared. I don't think anyone for what's happened over the last 12 months. The financial crisis, we had some insight at where it was coming, and I think even with the tech boom, and I was involved in tech back then as well. We realised quite soon afterwards it was, of course, that was going to happen, but it didn't seem like it. But I think this pandemic, nobody was ready for.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're sort of just looking at barriers and obstacles, and you've made it sound very smooth. You had tiny bumps maybe along the way, and a lot of people who dial in for our Power Hour are really interested in diversity in the broadest sense. You, as a female in financial services, and you talked about your experience in Italy, particularly. What's that life been like? Has it been a barrier? Has it been an opportunity? And just interested in, do you think there's been improvements to you over the course of your career from when you started?
Yeah, so first, have there been improvements? Hell yes. I mean, if I go back 30 years to how things were, things have changed dramatically. So I think there is now many, many more opportunities for people from a broader range of backgrounds and different genders to participate in different parts of the market. There were some very clear areas which were sort of off limits when I came into the workforce 30 years ago. So it has improved. I think some of the challenges that I think many female leaders experience sort of early on in their journey, that might still be there, but it's a little bit more covert maybe now. So it's, people talk about subconscious bias a lot. There's also conscious bias, which I think I was much more aware of in the earlier days of my career. The things that people would come out and say or ask you to do because you were the only woman in the room are quite extraordinary now. And when I relate some of this to my daughter, she's like, "What? Why did you ever put up with that?" Well, you did, because you didn't have a choice, quite frankly. So things have changed. That's not to say that there's a level playing field, and there still isn't a lot of things that we need to achieve. And that's why I think things like International Women's Day is quite important, just to sort of clock where we've got to, the progress that we've made, the what's left to do. And as you said, Charlotte, I spent quite a lot of time in the VC community, and that's changed dramatically as well over those years. But you can still see from the research that we've done at the bank, and you can see from your everyday experience, that there's huge progress that we still need to make in terms of making sure that funding reaches a diverse pool of entrepreneurs, and that there is that sort of level playing field for everyone who's talented and, quite frankly, would do wonderful things with the capital if they were able to secure it.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on it there, and I know that we obviously looked at this over the course of the last year, and certainly some of the work on the Future Fund, and credit to having that data out there as well to show people, and the same with CBILS and bounce backs. You're just talking about the levelling up agenda, and everyone talks about it in a regional perspective, but actually it's about levelling up every part, gender, race, geographical divisions, etc. I know that you're very keen to support that agenda. I mean, it goes without saying obviously why, but I'd just like to hear it from you, in your words. Why is that so important? And do you think we can? Because I think it's incredibly hard. I think we all want to do something about it, but obviously it's got to be done in phases. And just interested in sort of why it's important to you, and how, from your perspective, obviously in a hugely influential position, you're looking to change that.
Well, first of all, it's hugely important because it's a waste of resource. So if you think about efficiently managing anything, whether that's a business or an economy, you want to make full use of the resources that you have available to you. So if we're screening out certain sections of the population because they don't fit a particular mold, that's just wasted opportunity. So that's why I think it makes sense to try and address the issue, not just because it's the fair thing to do, it's the right thing to do, but it's also actually the most economically sensible thing to do as well. And we also know there's much more research now which looks into diverse teams, and diverse teams make better decisions. There's much more research around why that's the case and how that's happening. And then in terms of what can we do to move the dial, because I think there's a lot of activity in this area, but making sure that we're doing something in a coordinated way and something that's really going to move the dial, I think, is quite important. I was having a discussion like that with Paul Scully this morning, actually, the small business minister in Bays, to see what we can do next to move the agenda forward. And you mentioned Future Fund, and that's a good place to stop and dwell and think, because when we were setting up Future Fund, we did have discussions as to whether we should have or introduce a sort of carousel system that would over-index for certain types of entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs from ethnic minorities and so on. And the very clear decision was taken at the start of the process. We won't do that. We don't want to slow down capital getting into the market, because that's the pressing need right now, just to make sure that people can get their next funding round secured. But interestingly, and you've seen it from the data, in terms of the numbers of mixed gender teams and mixed ethnicity teams that we have been backed through the Future Fund, it's much better than market overall. And we've been trying to think about why that is. And I think partly it could be because the way VCs source their deals are through very long established networks of relationships. And perhaps it's the way that those deals are being sourced that are not particularly inclusive for certain types of entrepreneur. And when you have a platform, which is what we set up with Future Fund, and we also put quite a lot of information into the market, as you know, to encourage entrepreneurs to talk to their backers, to come to the Future Fund, to to request the funding, something in that mechanism made it somewhat more approachable for a broader subset of entrepreneurs and management teams. So I think that's something that we need to take away from the Future Fund experience and try to build into other things that we deliver through the bank. More broadly, the awareness around having funding available for a diverse group of entrepreneurs, I think the awareness is much higher now. And I think there's a lot of goodwill within the industry to try and solve this and tackle this in multiple different ways, which is fabulous. But I still think you need some institutions like ours to give this a bit of a motive force and to lead the way a little bit, because there's so many other things that people are trying to do at any one time. So just trying to keep that on the agenda and to keep the awareness high as to how where we are isn't good enough, and we need to get further along on these agendas is quite important as well.
And out of all the negatives, obviously, of the last 12 months and COVID, do you think the fact that I know your bookcase quite well now. I haven't seen you since you took over the job, actually face to face. Do you think that becomes a leveler? Are there opportunities to have a different way of thinking about this as well? The fact that you don't need to be coming down by train from, as it was people were saying in VC world, £200 cup of coffee to go and have a cup of coffee to be told that it's a no. Do you think that opens up some opportunities? And it seems quite logical. We should have been doing that a long time ago. But what does this look like in, say, 12 months' time? Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. And I'm sure that the ways of working that we've had over the past year have shown us that there's more than one way to do things. And when you look back to how we were operating pre-COVID, that feels very 20th century now, doesn't it? And we are in the 21st century. So I hope there's an opportunity to take this leap and bound, further into the 21st century, into the ways of working that we'll all be engaged with. And that should filter through also to the way people are going out and raising capital as well. But has it been a great leveler? We've also heard, of course, that for many women in the workforce, this has been an incredibly difficult time. And especially for women with families with younger children that had to be homeschooled when schools were closed. Managing, we're multitaskers, we have to be as women anyway, but managing homeschooling plus work plus a new way of working because of the pandemic, I think has been incredibly challenging for many men and women, but especially for women, because they often bear the brunt of the caring responsibilities for children and for relatives and elderly relatives as well. So I hope there will be some changes, permanent changes that come out of this pandemic as to how we think about flexible working. And something that we do see is that, hey, it is possible to work from home very effectively and productively. It does work. We do have the technology to allow us to do that. So if employers can continue to keep that level of flexibility, I think that's going to be, really critical and potentially a game changer as well for certain groups of people that, are more comfortable working from home or have other obligations, and it just works for them better to be working from home. What we'll probably see, of course, is more of a hybrid way of working model where people want to work from home sometimes and from the office sometimes. That's what I prefer, but then you organize your week around what makes sense for you rather than what makes sense for the employer per se.
Yeah, it would be nice to have some cutoff. I think that all of us have suffered from the fact that the blend from work to home hasn't been as defined as before. So the opportunity's there, but and I know you're the same as everyone else, just how many hours people are putting in.
Yes.
So how we're going to transition back to 4 or 5 meetings a day max from the 10 to 12 Zooms we do every day, I'm not quite sure, because we also have all these new contacts. It's like, how are we going to meet them all?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the idea of the commute, which we all used to hate, of course, is now sort of becoming like this special thing, because we'll be able to break away from our meetings in the day and go on a train and meet other people. So it's interesting what we thought of as really sort of less attractive things about our working week, which will become more attractive, at least in the post-adjustment phase, I think, as we all start getting back to working physical spaces again.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy, the transition. I think it's I think everyone sort of can see where it's going to be in a few years' time, but the transition isn't quite so clear and when that's going to be. Just on that, maybe before we sort of talk about the last 12 months at BBB, just be interested. Obviously, a lot of people have struggled when you talk about the caring responsibility, the challenges. I know you've got a teenage daughter sitting right behind your wall, and just in terms of your team as well, how have you managed to keep everyone's spirits up? Because I don't know how it feels, but everyone seems to be talking in the last 2 months, when I talk to in any company, large or small, of just how weary everyone's now getting, and just challenging even for the people without issues with mental health, just trying to keep the well-being of yourself, your family, and your staff. How have you managed that at BBB?
Yeah, we've tried to be quite organised about it, because we've introduced lots of initiatives, as many companies have, I think, around well-being, just to make sure that there are contact points for everyone within the business with their own teams, or more broadly across the business. So it's something that we've focused on. For me, because I came in, as you said, quite recently as CEO, and then I had a new team of people who were previously my peers, and now they're my direct reports, and finding the time to sit with them virtually, individually and collectively, has been a real challenge. And that's something I've tried to work on as well. You miss that sort of opportunity just to bring people into a room and just have a natter, quite frankly, or to grab a drink after work and thrash out some of the issues that you've been discussing during the day. It has been very, very different from that perspective. Fortunately, we knew each other well. So I'd been with the bank for years before, and we knew each other well. So that's been very helpful. Where I think it's perhaps more challenging is for new people that you bring into the business. So because of the COVID interventions that we introduced, we expanded dramatically over the last year. So we went from just around 300 people to over 400 people. And we've brought in over 100 people then, totally virtually. And I'm very conscious that I've not met those people, many of those people, most of those people actually physically. I've just met them in virtual world. And that's really weird in some respects. So how you start to re-establish those sort of face-to-face and person-to-person contacts will also be quite important, I think, when we get back into the office in the more physical space. And then testing with those new arrivals, what were they expecting, and is what they're getting what they're expecting, and are they all right? It's just, are you okay? And that's been an important focus, I think, for all of our line managers. We've done quite a lot of training just to make sure that we're checking with people that they are okay. You can't pick up all the cues over a screen that you can pick up when you're sitting, across the desk from someone.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is that water cooler moment, as I would say. It's and I always find that it's a 30-minute call for anybody, someone you've never met before in your life, but also someone really well. Everything seems to be in these slots of 30 minutes or 29 minutes and 29 and a half minutes, and that's not easy. And I think we've all got to do a better job of sharing how we all do it, because I think everyone has great ideas, but it becomes a challenge. I mean, just sort of talking about your last year again, you obviously you still took on the job despite knowing what you were taking on. And most people would say, "My goodness me, that was great." And I know that we dealt with your team, who were just brilliant last year. I mean, for everyone who was sitting there and saying it's not going fast enough, I can attest to the fact that there were lots of very, very late nights, 7 days a week for those first few weeks. And obviously we were probably pushing as hard as any to get our lenders accredited. When you were looking at that, obviously with Key still there, but how did you prepare yourself for taking over the bank? It's still exponential change and just so much pressure on an entity that everyone knew was there, but didn't probably see so much face to face every single day, and some of your front spotlight. How did you get ready for that?
Well, first of all, I didn't have much time because I was sort of called into a meeting with the Secretary of State at the time, Alok Sharma, who basically said, we know what you've done in the commercial arm. Keith had, of course, announced that he would be leaving the business at the end of last year. It wasn't the right time to go out and run a full process for the permanent CEO. And Alex Sharma said, we want you to step in and do this. And so I asked him some basic questions at the time, and it was a 29-minute call. I asked him some basic questions about what his expectations were, what he thought the big challenges were, and what the timing would be. You know, when would he want me to, you know, think about taking up this role? And again, I had like, you know, 3.5 seconds to do all of this stuff. That was fine. But then later that evening, I called up a friend of mine and said, look, I've had this conversation with the Secretary of State, and he's asked me to do this, and he's asked me to do that from the 1st of September. And she said, oh my God. She said, have you heard of glass cliffs? And I said, glass cliffs? I know about glass ceilings. And she said, search it up, search it up. And so she totally freaked me out. But anyway, I did search up, and what emerged is that women are often given the impossible job. You know, it's like, it's really impossible, you go and do it. So you're sort of being almost set up to fail. So that's what a lot of research is about. But I didn't think that's actually what was happening to me, because I knew from the relationship that I had with Alex Sharma previously that he had a very good insight into the work that I'd done in the commercial arm and how I built that department. And I think he felt I had the right qualities to go in and actually make a success of it rather than screwing it up in any notable way. I hope that's what's happened. We're in month 7 and we've continued to grow. We've continued to introduce new things to market. So with the budget, there was an announcement of the recovery loan scheme and future fund breakthrough, which we'll be launching shortly, coming to a screen shortly near you. So I think we've managed to, you know, keep the ship on an even keel, which was the request from the Secretary of State, and continue to build and continue to adapt and be responsive to this very, you know, sort of fast-paced and evolving environment that we have around us, of course, because of lockdowns and the trajectory of the virus.
Yeah, that's you know, a glass cliff. So I presume that's because it's too difficult to climb, or you can't see what you're running into.
Apparently, you don't see it's a cliff because if you fall off the edge of it. I think that's.
I was trying to work out the analogy.
I'm still standing, so perhaps I just haven't got to that cliff edge yet. But no, that's there's lots of academic research on it coming out of the US. And being the geek that I am, of course, I went straight off that weekend and started reading all this academic research on it. But then I thought, oh, well, doesn't apply to me. This will be absolutely fine. What could possibly go wrong?
And happy though? No regrets?
Very happy. I mean, it's been the opportunity of my career, really, to be at the center of this sort of whirlwind and things that needed to happen. So, yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to be doing what I'm doing, and long may it continue.
I mean, that's just an incredible journey. Looking at, we sometimes, we often have some younger people, young professionals who download in for these, and certainly, took them on download. What would be your advice to others starting on their own career journey, either with a really traditional degree or someone who's still trying to work out where their place in life is? Just be interested in, maybe it's what you say to your daughter.
Yeah, I suppose in a way I'd say don't be afraid. I think often we stop ourselves doing things because we overanalyze. Lots of the women that I've worked with in my career in particular tend to really overanalyze things. And then if you get yourself into an analytical loop, sometimes you just won't go there. And my experience has been, if you make that sort of bold move, not that everything goes, totally smoothly and is plain sailing, but I think personally I've had a really interesting career by taking some risks and taking up the challenge. So I would say don't be afraid. It's what you think could be difficult turns out to be not the things that are in practice. So that would be my key piece of advice. That's not to say don't go out and talk to people about the opportunity and make sure that you have as much information as you can, but don't be fearless, be bold, just do it, at the risk of sounding like a Nike ad here.
Well, the fearless girl, I'm thinking, who's got the glass in front of us, right? Maybe just before we turn to questions, I'm not sure there has been much relaxing, but I think everyone's been trying to work out work-life balance, and what do you do to relax, and how do you take the break from the pressures of the job, which must be relentless at the moment?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have a fun-loving family, so that's great. Having a husband who sort of will drag me away and take me off to do other things is quite good. I have a teenage daughter who's also an awful lot of fun, so that's helpful. So I think just to drag me out of my little room here to do other things. I also think it's important to sort of get some exercise and relax and stretch and breathe and do all of those things. So I like to do a little bit of yoga in the evenings, just to de-stress, and that helps tremendously. I do find that I don't breathe enough, so I do try to stop myself, say, breathe, for God's sake, breathe, Catherine, so that's good. But I also love just pottering about and being in the garden. I love going to garden centres, but my husband won't let me do that all the time, because he says, come on, how many pots can we get on that terrace, realistically? So all sorts of things I do, but very low-key things. I'm also, I should say, studying for an executive master's at the moment. So a lot of my weekends is taken up with reviewing, again, lots of academic work in fiscal governance at this point in time, which is fascinating. I'm a bit nerdy, so I like all of that stuff. But just being able to do very non-nerdy things to break it up is also quite important.
Sounds like it's the perfect lockdown exercise. You don't need to you can study at the weekends, and garden centres are open. I mean, you must be as happy as anyone. My worst nightmare. Amazing, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Right, we've got a few questions coming in, and I'm going to do my very best to pronounce the names here, and I really apologise for the first one. So I think it's Agni Milakaiti. I apologise if I've got that way out. But so her comment is that you're so inspiring in your career, and just incredible for women at the earliest stage of their career. She's an entrepreneur, and she's been thinking about the challenges women face in accessing funding in particular. So again, coming back to your diversity thoughts, what are your thoughts on funding and diversity, especially in regards to public and private funding? And should public funding have a more egalitarian standard in terms of redistribution of the funds, particularly around procurement, loans, VC investment, and pension funds?
All excellent questions. And I suppose the first thing I would say, there is already a lot of things out there, so it's good to inform yourself as to what's on offer. And we also have something that we call an information hub at the bank, which has digital journeys for entrepreneurs to go through to see what sort of finance is appropriate and what sort of finance is available, and will lead you as well to certain types of providers that might be appropriate to contact. It's good to use your network to find who those people are that you should speak to. But on your last question, should we be providing funding, in a specific way? I think where we've been is in the world of using what I call hard soft power, which is to try and really educate our providers of finance to think about where their funding is going, and to keep it on the agenda for them. It's a big leap then from that to say, if you can't demonstrate that you're investing in a diverse range of founders and entrepreneurs, that you won't get funding from us. That's a very big leap. But I think the more that we can do to make sure that our delivery partners, as we call them, our funders, understand that this is an important issue for us, that's what we should be doing. So as part of our due diligence, for example, when we're selecting fund managers, we ask lots of questions about how they're generating their investment opportunities, how they're screening those opportunities, what does a good investment look like? And then at the other level, what does their own team look like? Because something that we know is that if you have people from ethnic backgrounds and different genders within your team, then the pathway through to receiving entrepreneurs seems to work better as well. And I've asked somebody actually, why is that? And Apparently it's because, this is one of the explanations that I've heard, other partners then in the group realize that these people are really, you know, sort of super fantastic at what they do. So it breaks down this sort of subconscious or even conscious bias really as to what a good investor looks like and what a good investment looks like.
Thank you. A question from someone called Bridget Greenwood. I'm not sure which company, but she's saying that they're doing some research around the fact that it's deal flows, sourcing, and the pitching stage where bias can play a major part. And that sort of stats for investing in female founders has taken a step back during COVID, I think for some of the reasons we discussed, obviously. So they're looking at launching a new initiative and getting female funders funded. So who's the right person at BBB to discuss that?
So it depends on the type of opportunity, but you can come through to me in the first instance, and then I'll make sure that I send you in the right direction, because it could be within the commercial arm, it could be within what we call the mandated arm. It depends exactly on what you're trying to do. But if you approach me in the first instance, then I'll make sure that you find a way to the right person.
Great, thank you. More comment from Jane G. Hi, Jane. So she's Jane's female CEO of a RegTech company with tech that could help stop fraud in CBILS and government support schemes. So she's keen also in connecting with someone at BBB to discuss. So if there's a point person again on that, at all, Catherine, or we can connect you.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you feed it through into me, and then I'll make sure it gets to the right person.
So please do get in contact with the Innovate Finance team, and we'll make sure we gather these up together and get these over. A comment question from Mark Schoffman. Do you think CBILS and BBILS or bounce backs? So I still go for the CBILS and BBILS and acronyms. Have they restricted other lending that fintechs and peer-to-peer lenders may have previously stepped in to do?
I think undoubtedly there's been some displacement, and I think it would be wrong not to acknowledge that. And Charlotte will know that we worked quite hard to accredit a broad range of potential providers of finance to the market. But what we also knew was that the UK market is very concentrated on the lending side anyway, specifically with the big five lenders. And that was something that we raised concerns about early in the process. So we think there's definitely been some displacement, but we think it will come back. We don't think that's a permanent feature, because as we move away now from bounce back and into the recovery loans, it's going to be again a very different set of circumstances that we'll be playing into.
Just on that, and obviously we've been, as you know, dealing with a lot of alternative lenders. Do you think this is going to change our attitude to the different types of financing available in the different places? And how can we maybe educate SMEs around the country on that? Because I think there's lots of SMEs, and I hear this all the time, and we probably will hear this more post schemes, that maybe get turned down from a bank, want to start a new business, and then don't really know where to go. How can we change that and really raise that profile of this wider group of lenders?
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a scenario, Charlotte, where we get a more informed group of SMEs coming out of this crisis, because they've had to, often for the first time actually, look for external finance, and they've had to do that sort of research. Where do I go? Who do I ask? And I think there is more information generally about, it isn't just the banks, there are other types of finance, other places that you can go. The key thing is, how can you drive as many SMEs and entrepreneurs as possible to these areas where they can get the information? So we've got this information hub where it sets it all out beautifully, but you need to work out strategies to get people, to drive people to the hub, of course. The other thing that we've done at the bank is that we've put feet on the street. Of course, those feet are not really on the street at the moment, but that's in every region and nation of the UK, to form that sort of glue in all of these areas with all the advisors, the entrepreneurs, to make sure that people are aware of what the options are. And the options are, so broad today compared to, just going back 10 years ago. So there's much, much more on offer in terms of alternative sources of finance than there were pre the financial crisis. So that's all good. And continuing to improve the diversity of funding options and providers is going to continue to be a key part of our mission.
And I mean, just picking up on that, obviously a lot of people have talked about debt versus equity, and how we can change perception maybe of equity, and that not debt isn't for everyone. How do we go about that? So I know we looked at some work on growth capital with you last summer, but how do we educate people on the different ranges of options that there are, and maybe it's not always about lending as well?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that lending isn't going to be the solution for every company. And what we can see, certainly for faster growing businesses, equity is really the only way that you're going to get the business to where it needs to be. So how do you deal, in fact, with that resistance to take external investors into your business? I think role models, seeing how other entrepreneurs in similar sectors at similar stages have done it, can be helpful, so you can see the benefits of what bringing external finance does. I also think it's good to have flexible solutions, so it isn't always just about equity or always just about debt. And some of the alternative lenders have been really, I think, very successful in coming up with models which combine elements of equity and debt, which gives the growth capital required to the underlying business, but also allows the entrepreneur to maintain control of his or her business. So I think it's trying to set up different types of solutions for different types of business, but then recognizing some companies do not want to borrow, do not want to have external investors, they don't want to grow, they're quite happy doing what they're doing, and that's fine. I think where we're concerned is where we see businesses that do want to grow, that do want to develop, but they just can't get enough of the capital, enough of the rocket fuel that they need to take them to the next part of their journey. Yeah.
No, that's great. And we've got a couple of questions around the investment side now. Question from Ben Draven. Hi, Ben. So he's saying, the question is, how can investors continue to enjoy popular and political sport as the combined effect of automation and the pandemic increase economic inequality? And how can we ensure that investors are on the right side of history?
Ooh,
academic question.
Big question. And I'd love to say that I had the answer to that. And I was having a similar discussion actually today with some journalists about how the banks should position themselves coming out of this crisis, and how they're better positioned than they were coming out of the financial crisis. And I said, yes, but we're talking about very different contexts. If you think about where we were in the financial crisis, and banks were sort of blamed for causing that, in this crisis, banks have actually been part of the solution. And certainly the government and the British Business Bank wouldn't have been able to have delivered what it's delivered without leveraging the private sector infrastructure that's been built up by the banks and alternative lenders over the last, sort of decade or decades in some case. How do you stay on the right side of it? It's a very good question. Sometimes random events or one-off events can really throw things off course, so it's quite difficult to control for. But I think it's really important that all financial institutions do maintain certain standards themselves, of course. So it's important to separate an individual case from the whole sector overall. But I think that the financial sector is very well placed today and has been recognised as being supportive of the economy and standing up to the plate and doing what was required in an extraordinary, of course, set of circumstances.
Thanks. Question from Mike Jackson at Tech Nation, and Mike, congrats on your report today. Saying that at Tech Nation, we believe that investment in early stage climate tech companies is low compared to the market opportunity. And it's a really relevant question here. Is the VC industry being too timid, and should the bank take a lead role in stimulating investment in this vital sector?
Yeah, so that's something we're looking at right now. So that's very, very topical. And again, there was a bit of a false dawn, wasn't there, in clean tech? And I think lots of investors then turned away from it. But again, the fundamentals in the market support much more investment going into that area. So I think things that are coming into view shortly with the new infrastructure bank will perhaps make a difference. And we've been seeing actually in our underlying portfolio through BPC that investment in clean tech is actually, clean technologies is actually increasing actually quite significantly, although starting from a low base. I think it is starting to happen. And yes, I would imagine that there will be more support for that area because of what we all need to deliver in terms of, you know, a carbon neutral economy by 2050 as well. Something has to happen to get us there.
Do you think, you know, obviously the UK hosting COP26 later in the year, do you think that's going to be our light bulb moment, or you know, to take us forward on that? Do you think we're going to see some more of those opportunities coming through?
I hope it's a crystallization moment, because I think a lot of the opportunities are there. So I think it's really good to have a focal point where lots of people will come together to discuss ideas and what's going on. And I hope that will crystallize then a set of actions that will move that whole process forward. What we're trying to do, I think, at the bank is to try and be the voice of the SMEs in the transition to a net zero economy. As people talk about, you know, the big technologies that you need, carbon capture and so on, and they talk about big infrastructure projects, but every SME could be doing something to make their carbon footprint lighter. But what does that look like? How does that get funded or promoted? How do you get the information to the SME community? We feel that we have a valuable role to play there, and that's something we're working on in the sort of lead up to COP26, so that the other side of COP26 we'll have things to roll out. But it's the voice of the SME needs to be heard, and they need to see this as not just a huge challenge and more bureaucracy, but an opportunity actually to transform their business.
Well, presumably you still have Alex Sharma on speed dial, so you can just phone him up and say that you get this changed. He must owe you. He must owe you.
Not exactly on speed dial, but yes, I know where he is.
I mean, obviously we've run out of time for final questions, so I apologise for that. But I just want to say, I think we glossed over in some ways some of the challenges that women have in investment, and just how few role models people have in investors. And there are some amazing female VC investors out there, but there's also a lot of the investment community, obviously, that doesn't have enough women on their investment team, if any. So maybe just a final question from me. How can we change that? And obviously, you're in a great position to take this forward. What do you want to see in the next few years to really have those amazing role models and changing the face of the investment world?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what I've done personally, I suppose, I do take it seriously that you need to build diverse teams. So if you look at the team that we have at British Patient Capital, I think it speaks for itself. And just see, the picture of who we are there. I think recruiting is really important. So when you're choosing your advisors or headhunters that are putting the list together, you really have to say, no, this isn't good enough. I need a diverse list, please. That's fundamental, because if you don't bring people into the organization that reflect the population at large, you don't have the pool to choose from to then promote up the ranks. So it's about recruiting in, making sure that that's done in a very thoughtful way. And then when you're looking across the organization to promote, don't overlook people. Don't naturally promote people that look and think as you do. Try and do something different and better. And that would be my advice to anyone that's sort of hiring into an investment team. Look for somebody who's different and better. That's been my mantra.
That's great. Well, I hope that teenage daughter of yours is proud of all the great work you're doing, Catherine. It's just been incredible to hear your career journey, your life, your advice, and I know that everyone's really welcomed that. If there are questions, as I said, that you want passed on to Catherine, please do channel them through our team, and we'll make sure that they get passed on. But Catherine, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's been delightful to be with you.
And then we don't have to wait long for Leadership and Innovation series. So tomorrow at lunchtime at 1:30, we have Guillaume Couzaz from checkout.com, another one that I'm really looking forward to for various different reasons, obviously. So please, if you haven't registered, do register for that. I know that I've seen him interviewed and very much looking forward to that session as well. Catherine, thanks very much. And hopefully next time I see you, it won't always be with your bookcase behind you and might actually see you face to face. Thanks everyone for dialing in. Appreciate the time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.